So to speak to us this morning, we have a representative of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society who has been for many years, who has represented Jehovah's Witnesses in many countries throughout the world, a graduate of the Watchtower Bible School of Gilead, Mr. Erwin Klose. And he's going to speak to us for about the next hour and a half, or a little longer, on the subject, strict obedience to what? Jehovah's organization. Brother Klose.
No creature is born with obedience. And no creature, even under the new order, will be born with obedience, because obedience has to be taught by people which have learned to be obedient. Strange it may seem that, for instance, the Son of God, before he was in the earth, the Logos, for billions of years with his Father, having the knowledge of his past, had to learn to be obedient. By what means? If you'd like to follow along in the New World Translation, in Hebrew 5, verse 8, a text which most Jehovah's Witnesses have studied and are familiar with, but in this light of the discussion this morning, it becomes a more appreciated meaning. Here it says, although he was a son, he learned, notice friends, he learned obedience from things he suffered. He was a perfect Son of God. You would have known. He did see for thousands of years from heaven suffering men, but he himself, being in heaven, didn't suffer and learn how to suffer and then being obedient. That he had to learn when he started as a minister, as a servant of Jehovah God, being 30 years old. The new arrangements which we have today under the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses throughout the earth, namely that we have a number of overseers in each congregation, brings some new points out and helps us to appreciate, for instance, the expression of Paul in Hebrew 13, verse 17, where he says, and this is in the same book now, chapter 13, verse 17, be obedient to those who are taking the lead among you, and be submissive. There are two words in which are quite hard to take, in particular if an individual, which is an overseer, has limited knowledge about things and you know more. Or perhaps due to your education, perhaps you are a university graduate and he is not. Perhaps your position in the world makes you feel you are more than he is. But that didn't bother Paul to say, taking the lead among you and be submissive. Why? Paul continues and says, for they, these overseers, are keeping watch, not policemen. No, they are not policemen. But they keep watch over your souls as those who will render an account, because each overseer has to render an account to the one who appointed him to be an overseer, that they may do this with joy and not with sighing, for this would be damaging to, and this is strange, the last word. It doesn't say damaging to him, nor to you. Because this is the point that an individual coming in contact with Jehovah's organization has to learn obedience. I stress the point again, learn obedience. A number of minutes later, we come to the point of why it is said strict obedience. Sometimes, while being in the truth, an individual may say, well, now I am doing these things, and I know what I'm doing because I am so many years in the truth, so what is he talking about? Well, Saul was of this opinion, perhaps, and thought that what he was told to do, he didn't do, because he is a king. Anyone else tell me something to do, I just don't do it. I do the things I think I'm doing right. Well, then in turn, Samuel had to tell him something. And I mean now, tell him something, which of course was very disappointing for Saul. On page 338, that is 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 22. This is what he says. 3:38. In turn Samuel said, does Jehovah have as much delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of Jehovah? Look, to obey is better than a sacrifice, to pay attention than the fat of rams. So sometimes in your life, and some of you may be 40, 50 years being associated with Jehovah's Witnesses, and you have to make decisions. Decisions which may and may not have an effect on you or other individuals in the organization or the congregation you are associated with. So we have to make decisions on the ground. And the experience I relate within the next, Sam said 1.5 hours, and let's see. The experiences have something to do with strict obedience because the lives of individuals depend on the knowledge and the strict obedience of that one individual. Now, to be on the ground doesn't mean on the ground under the earth, as you know by now. That means that the organization is banned, as it was in Holland or Belgium and Germany where it was. And being on the ground meant that the work went on. But brothers, when you go underground, from above ground to underground, then the different brothers, which you all know right now, you know each other for a while, are not necessarily all dependable. Oh yeah, they say they are dependable. But sometimes there is such a little tiny thing as Jehovah said, don't eat the fruit, and they said, well, why shouldn't I eat the fruit? What's wrong with eating the fruit, you know? And Eve was eating and Adam was eating too. Just a small item. What's wrong with that? Well, in this case, it was also a small item, because the many brothers dependent on his obedience, strict obedience. And how did the grandservant and his assistant test this individual? Well, he was told, first of all, when they met, and this is related to me, and I know the grandservant well, and this brother was told and given a letter. And he says, put this letter in the mailbox tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. Not at 3, not at 1, not at 2:15, not at 1:45, 2 o'clock. What would you do? I tell you what the brother did. He had to go to the city. He was living outside. And he had to go to the city in the morning. And he thought, what's wrong with putting the letter in the mailbox now? At about 1:45, the grandservant and assistant came to his home and says, where's the letter? He said, and then he gives this long story of explanation and says, well, I had to go to the city And given that explanation, he said, well, I was anyhow there, and I put it into the mailbox. But what the brother didn't know was that he was from then on unfit for that particular position. And what position was it? This individual was assigned to travel underground. He had a terrific memory. He was able to remember names. He was useful for the underground organization, but he had to remember all the names because you couldn't put in writing a name and where a brother lives, can you? Because the Gestapo was always waiting for some brother doing this mistake, having a name in the pocket here, and then when they got this brother, they got also the name of the other brother. So they had to remember all the names, and he had to be dependable to deliver a message, if necessary, which your life and the life of the congregation depended on. In a few minutes I relate why I say that. So these brothers was told, well, I'm sorry, you cannot be used to that particular position. They didn't tell him what it was. They only told him he was not to be used for that privilege. Now, for instance, that I am here this morning speaking is because I was strict obedient. Not just obedient. Strict obedience. Well, of course, as I said before in my introduction, you may see an individual in the organization, and you know him for years, you know his imperfections, and you think in your terms, well, now, what has he what I don't have? Right? Correct? He and you and I have the same imperfections, but he was put by Jehovah, unless I don't believe this, and if I believe this, that he was put by Jehovah in that position, then he becomes an overseer. Then he can tell me things which I personally disapprove, perhaps. And perhaps I feel, well, now, how does he know? Yeah, perhaps you're right, how does he know? But that's how Jehovah operates. Maybe he's wrong, or maybe he's not. No, he's not wrong. So then, this individual then, when he came and was not fit to that position, had reason not to be appointed to that position. Why? Jehovah's organization, as we all know and believe, but it is so difficult to believe that at the moment that, for instance, the angels are here right now. Can you believe that? Well, they are. And when you do a certain job in Jehovah's organization, the angels are right there with us. And when we do an underground job, they have to be with us. Because we don't know what the enemy is planning, and the angels, however, know. And they have to do something, if that work has to go on, to prevent things the enemy is planning on. Well, Jehovah's organization was something planning. Something which was so unusual in Holland. That was in the year 1941. But before we come to that, there's something else. Sometime when I was underground in operation, you think, now how in the world, when now this brother comes and tells us what to do in the congregation, you couldn't write letters. The society couldn't write letters. The society didn't exist. At least not in the normal way. The only way of contact with the branch office was by way of this individual, this brother, which brought to the different congregation the one watchtower, and not a watchtower for everyone. One watchtower. Right? And boy, you had him sometimes only for 2 hours. You had to be finished with it. All right. So this brother had an important job. So as I was assigned to one congregation that was in the northern part of Holland, I was assigned for the purpose of building up that congregation. A number of brothers, as when you live underground for a number of months and maybe a year, and the pressure is on, you kind of feel down. which is true. You feel down. You feel, doesn't Jehovah don't do, and will Jehovah interfere now with something? The work doesn't go on. We can't go from door to door as freely as we were used to. We cannot even gather as a congregation. Perhaps 4, that's all. Now what are we going to do? So there was an occasion when, after being a number of months in that particular congregation, the congregation, when I left, we felt was built up, and the day came that I was appointed somewhere else to another position in Holland. So one day the brother comes. He never came in daytime. Now let me tell you something about the place where I was staying. As I was staying by Sam tonight with my family, and I came in the daytime, no problem. But when you came in a particular place underground, you never arrive in daytime. You bring the brothers and sisters in danger when a stranger walked into the house in. Because keep in mind that the enemy from then on, when the organization goes underground, is watching you. Because you were before in the community known as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. So then, the moment came that the individual was sent by the society to that particular town, which in the Hollands language was called Groningen. I was living in a house of an individual which had a delicatessen store downstairs, and I was sleeping upstairs somewhere in one of the rooms. I never entered the store, as I said, in daytime, and never left the store, so that the brother, or rather the person which was of, we call it of goodwill, but the wife was in the truth, and he permitted, and he knew he was anti-German, anti-Nazi. He permitted that I stayed, and he knew what kind of dangerous job we did. So whenever I entered the store in the evening, I entered the store as a customer. Well, now, you would use the following method to come to your place of destination. How can I use the shortest distance to get there? Well, forget about that being underground. I have gone the opposite. If I wanted to go to that direction, I went to this. Why? Because I didn't know somebody was following me, and I wanted to find out if I did. And if the same person was constantly behind me, he would never know where I went. Many times I used the tramway just to go a certain direction, get off, and get on in another tramway just to get to my headquarters. So when I went to that store and finally arrived there, I waited, there were customers in, and then that individually said, well, may I help you? And then I said, fumbled and mumbled something, and then finally when the last customer was out, I went through the stores upstairs and I disappeared. And I did this for 11 months. The congregation was built up. Many new ones came into the truth. And one day in an evening, that brother, the trusted brother with all the hundreds of addresses in his mind, visited us. And he said, tomorrow morning, use the 4:00 train. You go by train to the city by the name of Hilversum, and there a brother will wait for you. His first name, which was a fake name, that was not his true name, is so-and-so. I don't describe him to you. That's all. To take the train at 4:00, I had to walk to the station. It took me an hour. You mean to say I had to get out of bed around 2:30? Why don't I take the next train? How about 5 or 6, right? What's wrong? Nothing wrong with that. Only I wouldn't be alive today if I wouldn't have been in strict obedience, not knowing what the angels knew, But what Jehovah knew, and that's why this direction came. Now let me tell you what happened that morning. Obediently, I left. At 5 o'clock, the Gestapo raided the house. Somehow, I never know, these brothers never knew, they must have got wind from somebody. It was later related to me that the Gestapo cursed the entire morning because they couldn't believe in that I wasn't there. I couldn't believe it either. Because I went in obedience. I'm sure that brother at the headquarters didn't know why he sent that evening before that brother to tell me to leave. That something was organized for the future, which was for the future, because in Hilversum I became what she called the underground speaker for an underground radio. That was at least the plan. We had an underground, let's say a radio station going. That was the future plan. So I had to train to be a speaker every time for 10 minutes and a Holland speaker too. Strict obedience was it, that I'm alive today, not knowing what the angels knew, what Jehovah knew, and preventing from being caught. Brothers, I was wanted by the Gestapo, dead or alive. More dead than alive. Because the picture of mine was as well in the Belgium, in every police station was my picture. They had a nice picture, but that was the old one anyhow. In the meantime, I was changed so many times, you wouldn't even recognize me, big mustache and everything. I had everything what you can think about just to hide my outward appearance. So I was in strict obedience toward Jehovah and his organization. I know, by the way, that brother who was given that order. I was just 2 years ago with my family in Holland, Brother Winkler. You probably have read about him in the Watchtower, Arthur Winkler. And he was then the underground branch servant in Holland. And he let me know that I have to leave that morning, that early in that train. Now, I could have taken the 5 o'clock train, right? He could have said that easily. But he didn't say that. The brother told me I should leave the train and take the train at 4 o'clock. Now, if I would have taken the train at 5, perhaps, or 6, I'm sure I wouldn't be alive. On the matter of exact obedience, sometimes we cannot see what Jehovah has in mind. And so we often wonder, now why does Jehovah think this way? Why not the other way? Well, I've often wondered, in particular, as I said, when you're underground, you think different. When you every week come together a number of meetings, it's different. You get regulated food, you get informed about things, what to do. But if you wouldn't meet regularly, the demons try to do a lot of things. Sometimes brothers leave the truth. But now, there was a time in Holland, that was already the year 1942, where the German Gestapo and the German occupation people thought Jehovah's Witnesses are dead. Well, we have finally whipped them. They are finished. Well, we felt that at least the branch servant, and there was a time when these Germans thought that Jehovah's Witnesses are definitely finished in Holland. Many brothers were arrested. One time, 40 brothers were arrested. And I was nearly arrested. Only I escaped. The Gestapo was knocking at the front door. You notice what I'm doing? This is a method. You know, if you continue knocking, you get nervous, right? They're always knocking. They kept knocking. Anyhow, I don't want to go into that then. I jumped out of the window, and the Gestapo came in the front, and so I'm here alive still. But let's come back to that, what I was planning to say in exact obedience again. And sometimes we feel why shall I do these things? But Jehovah's organization says now. But don't you feel sometimes, I rather want to do it this way or that way? Well, as long as it isn't untheocratic, why not? The governing body is very lenient on certain points, but on certain points there, well, they just insist that you do it that way. So we wanted to show the Germans that we were alive, and the Holland's people too, that the witnesses were alive and active. So the brothers in Holland decided, the brothers which were in charge of the Holland underground movement, that we should deliver pamphlets, small pamphlets with Bible text on, different Bible text, powerful texts. Daniel 2:44 is quite powerful, eh? It's a nice text, we thought. Well, that's a good one. And a number of other texts, talking about the enemy and what happened to him. So, one day, 1942, this brother came again and said, quote, I use now a date. I said, on Thursday night at 9 p.m., you and the brothers who are willing to do this, distribute and throw these papers on the street, sidewalks, all over the town where you live, where you're assigned, from 9 o'clock in the evening till 9:10. Now watch what he said. Not 5 minutes to 9, not 9:15. When you are not finished with throwing everything out, millions of handbills were distributed with Edwards on the street. Quit at 9:10. It's a big test, brothers. Temptation. Everything is going well. Why should I quit? Nobody caught me yet. And of course, many have said at that time, and quite a number, they wouldn't do it. They said, why should I do that and endanger my life? Well, that's what the brothers thought it should be done. Doesn't it remind you of a similar incident before the city of Jericho fell? In Joshua chapter 6, that's on page 258 in the New World Translation, that's kind of an interesting experience which we all are familiar with. And notice what it says in verse 2, and Jehovah went on to say to Joshua, see, I have given Jericho and its king and a valiant mighty man in your hand. And all you men of war must march around the city, going round the city once. That is the way you should do for 6 days. For 6 days, all the men and kids and walking around there. And one brother said to the other, it's a kind of crazy, that thing, isn't it? First day, all right, but the second day, and nothing happened. And the third day, the kind of noddy you walk around that city, right? Let's face it. But that's not all them Joshua want them to do. Joshua, this, who he is. Yeah, we know him all. So, verse 4 and 7, priests should carry 7 ram horns before the ark. You mean that heavy thing they should carry too? Well, brothers, I couldn't do that. I'm, whatever your reason you had, if you would live in that time, he would say, well now, brothers, you understand I couldn't do that. And on the 7th day you should march round the city. You mean in 1 day 7 times? Oh, I'm not crazy. I stay in home. I'm tired. And the priest should even blow the horns. I don't know what's that for, but that Joshua is really getting naughty now. And it must occur that when they sound with the horn of the ram, and you hear the sound of the horn, all the people should shout a great war cry. I mean, I'm tired already, and the 77 times an hour even crying loud. Well, I couldn't do that. And he said, if you do all that, then the wall of the city must fall down flat, and the people must go up, each one straight before him. Don't answer me now when I ask that question. Would you have done it? Don't give an answer. Because I bet your life that some of us would probably have thought, well, he's kind of too naughty, I've always trouble walking. Couldn't I take the car? Well, let's see what Joshua and the people did. In verse 14 it said, "And they went marching round the city on the second day once, after which they returned to the camp." That was the way they did for 6 days. And then you notice in 15, "And it came about on the seventh day that they proceeded together early as soon as the dawn ascended, and they went marching round the city in this manner 7 times. Just on that day they were marched round the city 7 times. And it wasn't easy. It was very hard. But you notice in conclusion, in verse 27, "So Jehovah proved to be with Joshua, and his fame came to be in all the earth." You notice, friends, this well-known statement of the scripture here says, "And Jehovah proved to be with Joshua." Now why? Because it was strict obedience. This was strict obedience on his side. Depends now how would the people react. Now when this message came and the brother brought these handbills, he had a big piece of luggage, and I was the congregation servant in that city, and man alive, all them, this about of this size handbills. And he said, "Well now, this is what it is said. The same day on Thursday from 9 till 9:10, not before. Now you figure out yourself the entire city, and how many brothers are willing." And all this was told now to brothers who was willing to go. Some said, "No, I don't do that, brother." All right? Nobody was forced. Now, that Thursday came. 9 o'clock. Till 9:10. And I quit. And that's why I'm alive today. Because a number of brothers didn't quit. And they're there today. This is something, it's hard. I know it's very hard to understand. How in the world should I quit at 9:10? I've still the malicious handbills there. Huh? But I was told to do from 9 till 9:10. So some of the brothers were caught. They thought that it wasn't necessary to be that obedient. Well, that's how I feel about Jehovah's organization. The appointed overseers told us through the man who brought that message to work from 9 to 9:10, and that was it. So, there were the occasions where an individual could prove if he is obedient or not. There was one instance where the life of 120 depended on your strict obedience. Now, why 120? It reminded me when I see the 120, because we had, at that time, the organizing of this entire job was in the city of The Hague. A little bit outside, but let's say the next town is called Scheveningen. And Scheveningen and The Hague is just as one. You wouldn't know the difference and where the borderline is. But in Scheveningen, there was a man who had a shop. An awning shop. And this man was friendly toward the truth. One day it was decided that a certain portion of the Holland's brothers and sisters in that particular section of Holland should come together. Can you imagine? We don't meet longer with 4 and 6. We meet perhaps with 100. But exactly 120 were invited. Now how do you get 120 people in a public road, which is left and right full of houses, and they all come by bicycles? Now if they all came at the same time as here in the kingdom, what would happen, eh? The Gestapo said, "We finally got him." So these all things had to be organized now. Now, why do we say this morning all the time strict obedience? Is that something which we invented? Well, let me see if Jesus said something like being very obedient in Acts chapter 1. And notice, whenever I read this part, it brings always to my mind as He wanted them certain things to do, and that's it. Don't argue on the point. In verse 4 he says, and while he was meeting with them, he gave them the orders. And that's something, he couldn't say, please, brothers. No, he didn't say that. He said, the orders. Do not withdraw from Jerusalem, but keep waiting for what the Father has promised, about which you heard from me. Did they wait? Or did they say, well, I should have waited in Jerusalem. I have my business to do somewhere else, No, they didn't say that. You notice in verse 12 it says, then they returned to Jerusalem from a mountain called the Mount of Olives, which is near Jerusalem, being a Sabbath-day journey away. So when they had ended there, went up into the upper chamber where they were staying, Peter as well as John, and quoted all the names. And then 14 says, with one accord all these were persisting in prayer. And then in 15, now during these days rose up in the midst of the brothers and said the crowd of persons was altogether about 120. This wasn't coincidence that we, by coincidence, met with 120 brothers. But how did we meet? How do you get 120 brothers together without letting the Gestapo know? And the capital city of Holland had the headquarters of the Gestapo, and the Holland's police was looking for us. Just as a coincidence, one day, one Holland's Gestapo recognized me. This was something. I was driving on that one side of the bicycle path. In Holland, there's special bicycle streets or paths called on each side of the main thoroughfare. The traffic of cars is in the middle, and right and left are specially built bicycle roads. On this street between Scheveningen and The Hague, there was a hedge on each side. And I had a special bicycle built by a brother who had a bicycle shop which looked like a bicycle of a plain clothes man. Special built. So when a plain clothes man saw me, he always saluted me, because they thought that I was one of them. But the bicycle was built with that purpose to give them that impression, to fool them. And so as long as none of these guys recognized me, I was in good shape. But one day I was bicycling to The Hague, and there were two guys coming down there, and they looked, and they recognized me. Brothers, now came a race for life. They couldn't cross over. So they had to go a little bit further down. There was a crossover, and then I looked back, the high speed came. Well, they were older than I am. They didn't make it. I'm still alive. A lot of side streets, and I disappeared. But this I tell only in between, that this meeting here I wanted to talk about. How do you get 120 brothers with bicycles in one place in? And that man was kind enough to give his shop for that meeting. It was like a circuit assembly. The district servant was there, the branch servant was there, the assistant branch servant, and lying a lot of speakers. To get them all would have been just a blessing for the Gestapo, wouldn't it? Well, I tell you what we did. Everybody was told, first of all, if you come with a bicycle, don't have the nerve to bring it in within the neighborhood of it. Because we can't afford to put the bicycle in front of the home. At least not 120. So all these brothers and sisters were told. The meeting started at 10 in the morning. Now you come at 8. I use this as an example. The other one were told you come at 8:05, 8:10, 8:15. With 2, if it was a couple. And this way it took 2 hours to get them all in, without a bicycle, to walk in. The purpose of this was to not give the impression that there was somebody meeting there. We were not allowed to meet. That was illegal. At least by the New Holland's law, it was illegal. Brothers, that's how we got together 120 brothers and sisters. Now, if anyone would have thought, well, now, I don't make it at 8:05. I'll come at 8:15, right? Forget it. He would have confused. And if anyone at 8:15 would have said, I come at 8:20, can you imagine how it would look like? No, the brothers knew. Now, brothers, was everybody invited? No. Why not? It was too dangerous. Why? Well, first of all, the ones who were scared, they were not invited. The ones who were irregular meeting attendant were not invited. The ones who needed strengthening of their heart and their mind, that were the ones which were invited. You notice how the psalmist in Psalm 111 brings to our attention the necessity of meeting attendance regularly and of time. In Psalm 111 verse 1 it says, that's on page 707, praise Jah, you people. I shall laud Jehovah with all my heart. In the intimate group of upright ones in the assembly. Brothers, are we not the most intimate group in assembly here? You start to think you have, besides being married, this is the closest association which can exist. We are brothers and sisters. There's nothing closer. We give each other's life, not sell out to the enemy. You rather want to die for your brother than to betray him. Not that all brothers did this. Some became betrayers. As you know, from the 12, there was one betrayer already, which betrayed the Lord. So then, in the underground organization, some did become betrayers. But the intimate group, the 120 which met in Holland at that particular place, were brothers which loved each other. They wanted to see each other. And to see each other, and to see they are still faithful, they didn't know. Mind you, brothers, you think, of course, that I know a brother and sister, so I just call her up and say, how are you doing? No, you couldn't do that. You see, the 120 which met had to know that they are still alive, spiritually, physically. You were not to be told, since many new come in, and after a while they are trusted, not immediately. Any person who comes into the organization underground is not immediately trusted. As a matter of fact, for quite a while not trusted. You know that my first meeting was with 4 persons, and it went on for quite a while with 4 persons, and I didn't know that anyone else existed besides the 4 persons. There was my mother and I and a couple, and that's all. And I didn't know that in the next street was another meeting. I didn't know when. And if I didn't come to that meeting on Friday night or Thursday night or Monday night, I didn't know when the next meeting was. You realize why, eh? Because sometimes the Gestapo caught somebody, and they beat you up nicely. And then they say, now do you know where the other brothers live? You know your brothers? They talked in these terms. Well, then you could only do one thing. To betray or not to. What would you do? After all, after you got a few beatings and they put you in a prison and tomorrow morning you get another one. And they say, and tomorrow morning you get another one. What would you do, brother? Don't answer that. Perhaps you will have the opportunity, as I will have again, in a short period perhaps, to prove what we are. What kind of individuals are we? Are we really Jehovah's servants? Are we that deeply devoted to loving Jehovah and my brothers that, with the words of Paul in Hebrew, nothing in the world could take away from us You know this text? How often have I read this text in the prison, on a concentration camp? In Hebrew, in Romans chapter 8, 1 verse 35. Who will separate us from the love of the Christ? Will tribulation, or distress, or persecution, or hunger, or nakedness, or danger, or sword? And notice if you continue, for your sake we are being put to death all day long. We have been accounted as sheep for slaughtering. Do you realize, brothers, that we are, if the angels would not protect us right now, that the animals would slaughter us? You know, brothers, do you think in terms of this world are animals? They will tear us apart. And mind you, I mean it physically. If Jehovah would not protect us by these angels right now, that kingdom hall would be burned to pieces. They are good in burning kingdom halls, you know that. They have experience in that already in the United States. And, in tearing and feathering and all that, they are used to that. What they're only waiting for is from the signal. And then they start tearing us apart, and some of us may be killed. So Paul reminds us here, to the contrary, he says, in all these things we are coming off completely victorious through him. Not by your own physical thing. Forget about that. You young men, when I see you, I'm telling you right now, it doesn't matter how strong you are, they cut you nicely down. After a few beatings, you think entirely different. And then you say you come victorious of by whom? The one that loved us. For I am convinced. Are you? Or are you saying, when I came to the United States and learned a little bit more about the English language, and the brother said all the time, I try my best, and I thought, that's not good enough, brother. That's not good enough. Paul didn't say, well, I try my best. No, he said, I am convinced that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor governments, nor things now here, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creation will be able to separate us from God's love that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Are you convinced? As Paul was. I am convinced, he said. He said, well, I'm not sure. Oh, I do my best, Jehovah. Oh, no. He was sure. And when you read 2 Timothy chapter 4, and as you are familiar with it, he wrote this perhaps a few days before he was beheaded. Well, he was still convinced. He was still convinced. After the second imprisonment, he was still convinced that he will not give up. Trusting in Jehovah then would be a requirement. Well now, the test of believing that Jehovah God could do away with things and enemies if he wants to, we had the opportunity many times, of course, on the ground. But I think will ever forget the date of August 27 to August 29, 1935, because this is the memory of all Jehovah's Witnesses which were in the concentration camp on that date in Esterwegen. Esterwegen. We were with 120 brothers. There were 1,200 prisoners totally. We were 120 brothers in that concentration camp. I was the youngest, age-wise. I was a kid in the truth, and I was not even dedicated. Or I rather say I was dedicated, but I wasn't baptized. Didn't have a chance yet. I was many times out in prison, in and out in prison. I didn't have a chance to be baptized. But there were all seasoned brothers in that concentration camp. Some of them were quite of age, old remnants, the king's brothers. And there was one 73 years old. And you know, the SS thought so highly of him. By highly, I mean, I should explain that. They had such a hatred to him because he said he is an enemy because he didn't compromise. They did with him so many things, incredible physical, incredible things. He was a little short brother. He had even a little hunchback. He was not particularly pretty to look at, but his faith, his conviction. They felt that this brother was a tower of strength. If he would compromise, we would. How true that was, brothers. What a power of strength did from that young, old king's brother go out. He never compromised. So the day came, since they tried everything that we should write. Now you know, out of the Jehovah's Witnesses in Divine Purpose, what kind of letter we should sign. And of course we didn't. And the day came when they were trying to break us down. That was August 27, 28, 29, 1935. Now why did they try these 3 days? Or tried the third day? The third day never came. And we'll see why it not came. They had particularly a man which we have given a name because he was a sadist. He was an animal. He rejoiced in murdering people. He laughed. We called him the Iron Gustav. Why did he try so hard? On August 28, after the entire day of sport, they called it, about 50 brothers from the 120 ended up in a hospital. About 13 signed the letter. And that was one overseer who signed, and an entire little congregation, with the exception of one young brother, which was not baptized, did not sign. So the Iron Gustav figured, when it was evening, the next day everyone will sign, naturally. If he didn't succeed all to sign today, well, why not try a different method the next day? You know, brothers, some of you, or perhaps all of you, may have prayed already in your life and situations, and prayed hard, we could say, and long, and deep. But you cannot imagine what a group of brothers will pray when they know tomorrow is a new day of torture. So we prayed quite a lot. And the next day came, and we had to stand outside, the rest of the prisoners. They had to go out and work, and we, the Bible students, that was the name which were given us, and as you know, at one time we were called Bible students in 1931. And they always said, Bible students, stand up here, and straight, stand up there. And when they said Bible students, they were obedient. And they were yelling at us, they were beating us. Some took quite a lot of beatings, including myself. But when they said Jehovah's Witnesses move forward, we moved. So we forced them to say the name Jehovah every day. And they were furious. They didn't want to say it. But after a number of months, they were able even to pronounce the name Jehovah right. So we taught them the right way. But before we go into this final part in here, what Gustav promised, let's read together a text in Hebrew 10. And we had to rely on the promises of the scriptures that if Jehovah would benefit the other day and 50 brothers are already in the hospital, well, nobody could survive the next day. But all Gustav was planning all. So here's what the scripture said. But my righteous one will live by reason of faith. And if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. Now we are not the sort that shrink back to destruction, but the sort that have faith to the preserving alive of the soul. So we had to make sure that we had that faith in particular since the 13th signed. So the next thing came and we were waiting outside. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. No iron Gustav came. No. Finally, we were told to get back in the barracks. We didn't know what happened. But the next day we heard what happened. August the 29th. That was such a beautiful day. The Iron Gustav was married and he was living outside of the camp in a house. And he had a big motorcycle. This is one of the American motorcycles he had. A Harley Davidson, these old motorcycles. And every morning he came in the port, in the gate in, and sure, he started to make trouble. And that morning, August the 28th, he came in too. But he didn't make it. You know, there was a big gate, brothers. Big trucks go through there. And Gustav didn't make it that morning. He was head on against the iron post. Ain't that beautiful? Brothers, after a few months, he came back. And when he saw us, he said, Jehovah did it! And we agreed with him. Brothers, we agreed with him wholeheartedly. Yes, because Jehovah knew. Jehovah knew. We couldn't stand another day, not alive. Isn't it true what we read, brothers? We are not of that sort that shrink back to destruction. But my righteous one will live by reason of faith, brothers. So then, Jehovah will provide, and he did. When I told to Sam yesterday a little bit about, or to somebody else I talked, sometimes we talked about this brother now who had to remember all the names, nothing in writing. But here was August the 17th, 1942. I had different assignments in Holland. I was in different cities underground for 2 years. I spent also 5 months in prison. By the way, I have always noticed that Jehovah provided for me prison terms in each country I was. Even in the United States. The first time when I came to the United States, I was in Ellis Island for 3 days. Isn't that beautiful? So I said always in the past, I saw the lady from the rear the first time. You know what I mean? The lady of liberty. You see, she is with the front to what? and the rear toward Ellis Island. And we looked at it from the wrong side. Anyhow, the brothers had a lot of fun. We were 7 German brothers there, and we had a lot of fun finding out how the prison system in the United States works. I know it in different countries already, but then the United States I know it a little bit too. And now, sometimes, brothers, how does Jehovah provide when you have all the instruction and know what to do, and then suddenly you forget everything? Is that possible? To become servant of the brethren, in 1942. So I was sent to Belgium to serve the Flemish-speaking congregation. But that was only a part-time job. I was also a congregation servant in Antwerp. That was also a part-time job. I was also a courier. That means an individual which gets the Watchtower or any other new publication which comes from the United States over Switzerland, and another brother from Switzerland to Belgium, and from Belgium meet me in Antwerp, and I deliver the Watchtower to the Holland's border, and then the Watchtower goes to Antwerp, where we had an underground printing plant. Imagine that, an underground printing plant. Did you ever see a thing like that before? Not literal underground. It was a beautiful, wonderful thing. And the Gestapo looked many times per week at the Watchtower walls off there and didn't see it. Now, how can that happen? Now, that individual was anti-Nazi, the owner. By the way, he became a brother after the war was over. He became a brother. But he printed for us. Of course, and the Watchtower was not the name Watchtower on. You couldn't. Every time was a new name on. Light Tower was one name at one time, was a light tower. So the Watchtower came under different names out for 4 years underground, printed in Amsterdam. And also I was part-time black market operator. That's the same position, isn't it? Well, we had to eat, brothers. I'm not kidding, we had to eat. It was Goering who at one time said he doesn't understand why the Belgian population is still alive. Because according to the rationing we got, or we didn't get anything, but the rationing the Belgian population got, it was so little that they should die. So from that little, the brothers which were assigned in Belgium were a number of German brothers working underground. The branch servant was a German brother by the name of Hartstein. You probably read in the Watchtower about him just about a year ago. Friedrich Hartstein. The wife is still in the Holland's Bethel in Holland. Both belong to the remnant. It's kind of interesting to know how an individual being 11 years old does know if he has the calling to the anointed or not. He did, in spite of the opposition of the parents. And he died faithfully in Holland. Anyhow, this brother and other brothers and myself were living underground in Belgium. I had to eat. So I had to provide for the, what you call, black market operation. Get some food somewhere by the farmers. But now let's come to that particular incident on August 17. So I was assigned now, and it was all organized, to set up a regular route to meet over the border, back and forth, and deliver the Watchtower or any new book. For instance, the new book Religion, the 1942 book Religion, we had it printed too in Holland. We had it in the Holland's language, translated and so forth. And all the Watchtowers in the wake, we had to find a route back and forth over the border. So on August 17, the branch servant and his assistant and myself, we met somewhere on the Holland-Belgian border. Place and designation was given by this brother who was assigned in the last minute. Always cautious. So we met at the border, and there were some people at the border which were not Jehovah's Witnesses. Their house was right at the border. And they were totally informed how the border police operated. on the borderline. It was all in German hands. So we were told then that the German border police would pass that particular place there where I had to cross, let's say, around 2 o'clock, right? Now I had all the instructions, this time really literal, written instructions. My assignment for Belgium, the brother I would meet, and there my bicycle was exchanged with the Belgian bicycle. You would say a bicycle is a bicycle. It's not true. The Belgian bicycles are entirely different than the Holland bicycles. So I got at the Holland side a Belgian bicycle, and then I had to cross. Now I got all the instructions, brother, now. And that one brother said, now the branch servant said, now when you come into the forest I crossed over the border in the forest, thick forest. Now I said, you come on a fork. Now you use the left side and travel for a number of kilometers, and then the brothers will meet you. The branch servant will meet you, and so forth. I was loaded with items, information which the branch servants exchanged on the ground, and that all, and of course my piece of luggage, one piece. I'm traveling bicycle over the border. Now I come at the fork. Brothers, what did he say? Did he say left or right? Standing there. You know, you sweat. And I mean, I really was sweating now. I know at only 10 minutes time. I took the right side, which was the wrong side. And I travel and travel and travel and travel for a kilometer in the forest. Finally, I thought I must be wrong. And of course, you know, you get really nervous. I don't know if you ever got really nervous. I got really, I was so confused. And I stopped and I got off the bicycle, and then my piece of luggage was falling off the bicycle. I had to fasten it, I'm losing all the minutes, you know. But brothers, these all had a purpose, which I didn't know. But Jehovah knew, and the angels knew. I didn't know anything what did happen in the meantime. Well, what did happen? The man at the border did not know that that day the time schedule was changed. He didn't know about that. Jehovah knew, the angels knew, I didn't know, the branch servant didn't know. So I went back to the same fork, and now I went the right way. The brothers thought already that I was caught because I was long overdue. And there we found out later on that this incident did happen. Obedience, even if information given, and the angel will fix it that you forget about things, right? Isn't that beautiful to think about that? I give you one more. I'm already over time, but I give you one more. Many times when we read in the scriptures, brothers, about Cyrus was used, being actually an enemy of the truth, of God's people, he was used to free God's people. As we were planning to make the regular crossing of the border, and I met always with a brother at the border, this was somewhere in Belgium, at the borderline. There was a house, a restaurant, which the restaurant was on the Belgian side, because he was in Belgique. He spoke part French and part Flemish. And the garden was actually on the Holland side. So his place was the perfect place to cross the border, wouldn't it? Go into the restaurant and go out in the garden, and you are in Holland. So what we did was, we used that particular restaurant, to have meetings. The branch servants met there twice per year. We, that means myself, and the other brother from the other side, we met there about every 14 days to exchange He brought then 400 watchtowers. Can you imagine 400 watchtowers? Me and the borderline there. I can tell you stories that you would laugh about it. How is it possible? You know that by law, the border police has the right to check each package within 3 kilometers of the borderline. I think this exists also in the United States. One day, first of all, the owner of the restaurant told the police lieutenant, which was a Belgian police lieutenant, that don't touch that man there. He told him that, don't touch that man. This police lieutenant was anti-Nazi. And he personally never saw me. He only said, don't touch that man. That was me. You know why? Not because I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Because he thought, and we left him in that belief, that I belonged to the British intelligence. And whenever I came with my pieces or luggage, they thought I had some bombs in there or something. Well, one day, a new policeman was assigned to the border guards there. And he stopped me. There's always a train going close to the borderline. And I was walking through the little town there. He stopped me. He said, open that package. Well, I would shoot myself. It's the same thing. Why should I open that package? So I didn't open it. He said, I don't open it. I said flatly to him, I don't open it. I know the lieutenant was on my side. But above all, Jehovah was on my side. All right, he said, you come to me to the office. And I went. And there I meet for the first time the lieutenant. He said to the policeman, he said, okay, I take care of him. He did. You know what he said? The next time make smaller packages. That's all. And he let me out, let me go. This was the food the brothers needed. Because when the printing plant was in operation, we didn't have a longer one watchtower for each congregation. We all had watchtowers, and I brought them every 14 days over the border. When the war was over, the branch servant wrote to this man a very wonderful letter. And he wasn't angry that we were not belonging to the British intelligence. And he sent him many books and literature, and he took it. So that's how Jehovah provides. Brothers, in conclusion, I like to stress here one point under the subject of strict obedience. Today in 1972, as it was 1900 years ago, Jesus Christ is in charge of his people. Right now, I'm sure many brothers are in different parts of the earth where the organization is underground, doing wonderful underground work. I could tell you little stories from different places which do take place, which are fantastic. And the proof that Jehovah is with his people. Although we don't see it in a literal sense. But remember that the one servant of Elijah, which was so in fear, and he said, alas, we are surrounded. And what did Elisha say? Jehovah opened his eyes, and he saw the mountains full of horses at war. And so Jehovah, through his King Christ Jesus, is at war with the enemy. And in conclusion, let's read this text in Matthew 25, verse 31, so that we do get the assurance that Jehovah's angels are with us every day in the activity in serving him. Notice, and this has happened since 1914, when the Son of Man arrives in his glory, and he is ruling as king in his glory, And notice all the angels with him. Then he will sit down on his glorious throne. The angels are here, brothers. They are willing to serve us. The angels are obedient because the leader of the angels learned obedience. Brothers, the day may come that you cannot meet freely as you do. Rely on the angelic direction. Let your faith be proven true that Jehovah is able to deliver his people out of tribulation. Thank you, brothers.